Hi, my name is Zazi. I sometimes write articles for Cemetery Confessions. I am thinking about expanding into doing YouTube videos as well, and I like the Goth Music Tag that has been going around YouTube. So I decided to make a video for it myself as a test run for possibly making YouTube videos. So, on to the first question. So question number 1 on this tag is, who was the first goth band you ever listened to? So I don't remember exactly which band I listened to first, but it was either Bauhaus or Sisters of Mercy. I had listened to some bands that were on the edges before, like Killing Joke, Joy Division, and The Cult. And I did hear Susie and the Banshees once before, but that was Dear Prudence, which was a cover, so I'm not really going to count that one. Question number 2, how were you introduced to goth music? So I originally learned about it on the internet because I was curious as to why a bunch of kids in school were wearing black all the time. And I saw all these bands like Switchblade Symphony, Alien Sex Fiend, etc. And they just sounded like cool bands. They had cool names. I read that they had come from punk, and I was already listening to punk at the time. So I was keeping my eyes peeled for whenever I could come across those bands. Because this was in the mid-2000s. And you couldn't easily just get on the internet and look up what a band sounded like. So most of my early exposure was through TV or satellite radio. So occasionally they would play goth music videos on TV. I know on like this music video channel called Views, they don't really play music videos anymore. But they had a show, Steven's Untitled Rock Show. I was into punk at the time, and I would occasionally watch it, even though mostly at that point it was a bunch of emo music videos. But towards the end of each episode, they would have a classic alternative band being played. And I remember once they played Bela Lugosi's Dead by Bauhaus, and I remember liking that one a lot. So question 3, what was your first impression of goth music? So, basing it on some of the early songs I heard, when I heard Bela Lugosi's Dead, it kind of felt like it had an old, kind of atmospheric movie quality towards it. Like, it sort of reminded me of like a old VHS tape that had some kind of shaky sound quality. I guess I kind of like the lo-fi vibe of it. And for another song, was an early one I heard, it was This Corrosion by Sisters of Mercy, and I kind of loved how the guitar sounded a bit like a harpsichord. I remember when I was a kid and I had like the electronic keyboard, I'd always go straight to the harpsichord preset. So I thought it was kind of cool that there are bands that had like harpsichord sounding instruments in it. Okay, question 4, favorite originating goth band. So if I had to pick one, definitely Bauhaus. I know it's kind of cliche since there's just kind of like the number one band people first think of when they think of goth bands, but when I listen to some of their stuff, I just think to myself, how did they do this? Like, I hear In a Flat Field, I hear that guitar, and I'm completely puzzled as to how they made that sound, even now. Okay. Question number 5 is favorite goth subgenre. I don't really have a specific favorite, though I definitely lean a lot towards the second wave goth rock, such as Sisters of Mercy, Fields of Nephilim, Mission UK, and bands like those, and some of the death rock revival that was around in the 2000s. Kind of like a lot of the slightly harder edge stuff. But I also like quite a bit of the like 90s dark wave, some of the slightly ethereal stuff, or the stuff that has a little bit of electronics or other genres kind of mixed in. Question number 6, favorite era of goth music. Definitely the 90s. I know a close friend of mine has said my taste in music is very specific to 1996. And that always just amused me because that's a very specific description. And I can't even really argue with it. There are quite a few newer bands I like, and there's bands from the 80s I like, but my tastes are most shaped by 90s bands. Okay. Question 7, top 5 goth bands. So for when anything's asking for my favorites, it's always subject to change. But I'm not going to cop out and say, oh, I don't know. So I'm just going to name 5 that come to mind that I'm particularly liking at the moment. So there's Rosetta Stone, London After Midnight, Corpus Delicti, Die Laughing, and Vendemian. Number 8 is top 3 goth albums. So again, like the last one, these favorites are subject to change. So one of them is Where Shadows Lie by Bella Morte. I remember when I was around 18, 19 years old, I really loved this album. I kind of liked the synth sounds on it. It sort of had like a sort of synth pop sound with also some somewhat semi-operatic vocals and a little bit of like real world sounding instruments mixed in as well. It's kind of hard to explain unless you like take a listen for yourself, but it just had that atmosphere that I really liked about it. The other 2 both have sort of a common theme in that they both kind of like really mix it up with song structures. It's not verse, chorus, verse. Neither is it kind of like a repeating phrase. The songs will start out one way and then they'll like go off to a completely different way. So the 2 albums are Garden of Remembrance by Oneroid Psychosis and Spirit of Sancti Bizarre by Dead Chovsky. The first one's kind of dark wave, sounds a little bit like Soper Aeternus, though the vocalist sounds a bit more like Sean Brennan of London After Midnight. And Dead Chovsky, the best way to describe them is kind of like Cinema Strange, but even weirder. Okay, so number 9, favorite goth songs. So going by my favorite bands above, my favorite Rosetta Stone song is Leave Me for Dead. My favorite Vendemian song, it's kind of a tie between Starter for 10 and Sin. Favorite Corpus Delicti song is Patient. Favorite London After Midnight song is Where Good Girls Go to Die. And my favorite Die Laughing song is Garden of Thorns. And for a few other favorite songs, I like Allah and Asha by Mephisto Walls, We Treat the Blindness by Strange Boutique, Falling Stars by Frank the Baptist, Fallen by Zadera, and Paris Skies by Big Electric Cat. Number 10, is there a goth band who you couldn't get into? Not really. Usually when I'm not feeling a band, the first song by a band, I don't try more, but I don't think it's fair to judge a band based on one song. But I guess for bands that didn't catch me immediately, I'm not particularly into like Lebanon Hanover or Cold Cave or stuff like that. Number 11, favorite iconic goth female lead singer. So there's a specific list that was given for this tag. It was Susie Sue, Monica Richards, Gatane Dimone, Eva O, Dina Cancer, and I forget if there were, Lisa Hammer. And I have to say, without a doubt, Monica Richards. So recently, I was able to go see Strange Boutique perform live. It's a band that hasn't broke up in 1994. It's Monica Richards' first band before she was in Faith in the Muse. And this was like a one-off show in DC. It was to commemorate their guitarist's death. I don't know if they'll ever play again, and I'm just so glad I was able to go there and see them perform at all. And Monica Richards like walked past me once and was right next to me another time too. I know my friend talked to her and told her she did a good show. I was a little nervous, so I didn't say anything. But yeah, I like Strange Boutique a lot. I like Monica Richards' solo work, and I like Faith in the Muse. Number 12, thoughts on Andrew Eldritch. So I like Sisters of Mercy, but I don't feel like a lot of what made the band good and like their earlier work wasn't all Andrew Eldritch. Like I know Wayne Hussey was the one who wrote Marianne, not Andrew Eldritch, for example. And I feel like at this point people go see his shows, but I'm not entirely sure why some people do. I mean, if you like Vision Thing, I'm sure you'll like enjoy the more recent shows, but from what I've heard, his more recent shows are definitely more in the Vision Thing vein, and he doesn't seem to really want goths in his audience. So I'm not sure why people go in expecting it to be good and then end up disappointed, because at this point it's well documented that you're not going to hear anything like First, Last, and Always in the live show. 13. What are your thoughts on modern goth bands who come out since 2010? In general, I like some of the bands. I really like Drab Majesty. I like Aeon Sable. There's one band that sadly doesn't get a lot of hype. I really like Gild the Morn. They kind of sound a little more 90s. But overall, I feel like recent bands, it's a little too 80s sounding and a bit too synthy. I mean, I like synthesizers, but a lot of it's like early 80s synth sounds. It's not really my kind of thing, as I said. I prefer like harder edge stuff. Though there is still a lot of new bands that I do like quite a bit. And the final question, number 14. If you could start a goth band, what instrument would you play and what bands would you take influence from? So I play guitar. I'm actually in the initial stages of possibly getting a band started. We've got a singer and a drummer who are interested, and we'll see where that goes. But yeah, bands I most take influence from, I kind of already named most of them, like Rosetta Stone. I really like the guitar work on there. I like Vendemian. I guess to move beyond just goth bands, though, some of the other influences that would be kind of similar and would mesh well. I really like the band Luna Sea, and they're not too far off from goth rock, sound wise. So yeah, I've like take influence from like a lot of the second wave goth rock, death rock bands, and a little bit from like the more ethereal bands to mix some of that in. And I guess I've also been kind of influenced by like some of like the 80s metal bands, so take a little bit of influence of that and mix it in, but not so much where it like loses the goth rock sound. Anyway, that is all the questions in the tag.